The blue lights hit your rearview mirror before you even realize you've done anything wrong. Your hands tighten on the wheel. You check your speed. You glance at the clock. Then you hear the siren chirp once, short and sharp. That's not a suggestion. That's a command. You pull over, engine running, heart racing just a little faster than you want to admit. The officer walks up slower than you expected, not rushed, not angry, just watching, always watching. And then, after a few minutes of routine questions, something shifts. Another unit arrives. A dog steps out of the vehicle. You feel it before anyone says anything. This just got serious. Have you ever been in a traffic stop where things suddenly escalated, where what started as something small turned into something that made you nervous or unsure what to say next? If you have, drop your experience in the comments. I want to hear what actually happened to you, because later in this article, I'm going to explain something that most drivers completely misunderstand about these situations, and it can make the difference between driving away and facing charges. Now let's get into it, because this is where people make mistakes they don't even realize they're making. When a K9 is brought to your vehicle during a traffic stop, most people assume the situation has already gone too far. They think, that's it, they must have something on me. But that's not necessarily true. In fact, a K9 sniff is one of the most misunderstood parts of roadside law enforcement. Here's what you need to understand first. Officers are trained to observe behavior long before that dog ever shows up. They're watching your hands, your breathing, your eye contact, how quickly you respond, whether your answers match your passenger's answers. They're not just listening, they're building a mental timeline. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Many drivers talk themselves into deeper trouble before the dog even arrives. You'd be surprised how often a simple question like, "Where are you coming from?" turns into a 5-minute explanation filled with unnecessary details, contradictions, and nervous filler. Officers are trained to notice that, not because talking is illegal, but because inconsistent stories can create reasonable suspicion. That's the key phrase right there, reasonable suspicion. Because without it, they can't extend a traffic stop beyond its original purpose. But once they develop it, the situation changes. And that's often when the K9 unit gets called in. Now let's talk about the moment that really matters. The dog walks around your vehicle. You're sitting there trying to look calm. Maybe you're telling yourself, "I've got nothing to hide." Maybe you're hoping this will be over in a minute. Then the officer says it. The dog alerted. That sentence carries a lot of weight, more than most people realize. Because in many cases, a K9 alert is used as probable cause to search your vehicle. That means the officer doesn't need your permission anymore. And this is exactly where most drivers make a critical mistake. Not because they're guilty, but because they don't understand what to say, and more importantly, what not to say. Let me walk you through a realistic scenario. The officer comes back to your window. "Sir, the dog alerted to the presence of narcotics. Is there anything in the vehicle I should know about?" Now think about that question for a second. It sounds simple, almost casual. But it's not. It's a pressure question, and pressure changes how people respond. Some drivers panic and start explaining everything in the car. No, there's nothing illegal. I have a prescription. My friend was in the car earlier." That kind of response can spiral quickly. Others try to joke. That's even worse. Humor does not translate well in high-pressure legal situations. What sounds harmless to you can sound suspicious or evasive to an officer. And then there are the drivers who say, "Go ahead, search. I've got nothing to hide." That right there is one of the biggest misconceptions on the road. Because once a K9 alert is claimed, your consent doesn't actually matter in the same way anymore. But giving consent can still remove certain legal protections you might otherwise have. So what should you say? This is where the title of this conversation becomes real. When an officer says the dog alerted, you need to stay calm, controlled, and very precise with your words. You say clearly and respectfully, "I do not consent to any searches." And then you stop talking. That's it. No explanations, no justifications, no added details. And here's why that matters. Even if the officer proceeds to search your vehicle based on the K9 alert, your statement preserves your legal position. It makes it clear that you did not voluntarily give permission. That distinction can become incredibly important later, especially if the validity of the K9 alert is ever questioned in court. Because here's something most people don't realize. K9 alerts are not infallible. Dogs are trained, yes. Handlers are trained, yes. But alerts can be influenced by handler cues, environmental factors, and even residual odors that have nothing to do with current illegal activity. There have been real cases where alerts were challenged successfully because the circumstances didn't hold up under scrutiny. But none of that matters if you've already talked too much at the scene. Let's go deeper into that moment, because this is where things get psychologically intense. The officer may not react immediately to your refusal. In fact, they might ignore it entirely. They might continue asking questions. Why don't you want us to search if there's nothing in the car? That question is designed to make you feel like you're doing something wrong by asserting your rights. And a lot of people fold right there. They think, if I don't agree, I'll look guilty. But here's the reality. Your rights are not based on how cooperative you appear. They exist regardless of how the situation feels. You are allowed to refuse consent. That is not suspicious behavior in itself, but the way you refuse matters. Tone matters. Body language matters. If you say it aggressively, if you raise your voice, if you become confrontational, you're changing the entire dynamic of the stop. Now the officer isn't just observing, they're reacting. That's not where you want to be. Calm, steady, clear. I do not consent to any searches. Then silence. And silence is harder than it sounds, because humans are uncomfortable with it, especially under pressure. Officers know this. They're trained to let silence work in their favor. They may stand there, they may look at you, they may repeat questions in slightly different ways. Are you sure there's nothing illegal in the car? Do you have anything you shouldn't have? What's in that bag in the back seat? Each question is an opportunity for you to either stay consistent or start unraveling your own position. And here's something that catches people off guard. Passengers. Officers often shift attention to passengers when the driver stops talking. Where are you guys coming from? Whose car is this? Do you know what's in the trunk? Passengers who aren't prepared can accidentally contradict the driver, even if both are telling the truth. Different wording, different timing, different details. That's all it takes. Now the officer has more to work with. This is why awareness matters, not just for the driver, but for everyone in the vehicle. Let's talk about another common mistake. Documents. When an officer holds onto your license and registration longer than expected, people start getting anxious. They think something is wrong. They start talking again. Is everything okay, officer? Am I in trouble? That kind of questioning can reopen a conversation you had already closed. And once the conversation is open, it's harder to control. You don't need to fill that silence. Let the officer do their job. Now here's a part that people rarely think about. The officer's tone. It can change suddenly. Friendly at first, then more direct. Sometimes even slightly confrontational. That shift is not random. It's strategic. They're testing your reactions. Do you get defensive? Do you start explaining more? Do you contradict yourself? Every reaction gives them information, and information is what drives decisions during a stop. So when the K9 alert is mentioned, understand what's really happening. It's not just about the dog, it's about everything that led up to that moment. Your behavior, your responses, your consistency, and your ability to stay composed when the pressure increases. Now, there's one more layer to this that people often overlook. Timing. A traffic stop is supposed to be limited in scope and duration. It's tied to the original reason you were pulled over. If that time is extended without valid justification, that can become a legal issue. But again, that's something argued later, not on the roadside. On the roadside, your job is not to win a legal debate. Your job is to avoid making the situation worse. And that brings us back to those words. I do not consent to any searches. Simple, clear, controlled. You're not arguing, you're not resisting, you're just stating your position. And then you let the situation play out. Because no matter how confident or uncomfortable you feel in that moment, what you say, or don't say, can follow you long after the blue lights are gone. The road goes quiet again eventually. The officer steps away. Maybe they search, maybe they don't. Maybe you drive off with a warning. Maybe something else happens. But the real impact of that stop doesn't always show up right away. Sometimes it shows up later, in ways you didn't expect. And that's why understanding this moment, when the K9 alerts, is so important. Because it's not just about what the officer does next. It's about what you choose to say when it matters most.